And I also say that because I've watched every talking head out there, and none is better than our guy, Greg Willard, professor at St. Louis University Law School, and is a KTRS legal analyst. Good morning, Greg Willard.
Good morning, McGraw.
All right. By the way, first of all, shame on you. Shame on you. Your wife was in the helicopter when Nixon left from the lawn?
My wife, Annie, was a member of President Nixon's White House staff, and when the president resigned and flew to California on August 9th of 1974,
yes,
Annie was on Air Force One with him and 3 or 4 others.
That is a story. We should get you off the show, get her on here. That's much more interesting. All right, let's get to it, because many people are invoking similarities between Watergate and this and back and forth. A question I've yet to hear anybody ask, and I'll ask it of you. What is obstruction of justice? Explain it to us.
In its simplest form, McGraw, it is an attempt to interfere with, impede a criminal investigation, a criminal prosecution with a corrupt motive. And so that's the lawyers call it mens rea. The talking heads will refer to it as criminal intent. So it's a not only the act, but the act has to have a bad or a corrupt purpose.
So okay, what was Nixon charged? Because one of the charges Nixon had was obstruction of justice. What did he do that crossed that line?
Well, it's an interesting analogy. The opponents of President Trump would say what Nixon did and what Trump is alleged to have done based upon Comey's testimony yesterday is obstruction of justice and the so-called smoking gun tape. What Nixon did, and it was revealed on the June 23rd tape,
right,
was he instructed Haldeman to tell the CIA, to tell the FBI, quote, "We wish for the country, don't go any further in this case," the case being the 4-day-old Watergate investigation. That was the smoking gun tape. That led to him having to resign. What the opponents of President Trump are saying is Trump is even one step closer. He didn't ask that the CIA ask Comey to stop the Flynn investigation. According to the testimony yesterday, the president directly asked Comey to stop the Flynn investigation. So the opponents of President Trump are saying, aha, the past is repeating itself, and this is exactly what Nixon was forced to resign, and they would say that President Trump has done the same thing, and so it's high time that we start up impeachment proceedings.
Right. Okay. So, is it? I mean, it's because if breaking down what Comey said yesterday, and talk about parsing words, right? It was help me, right? It was help me or whatever there was, right? So Comey says he didn't verbally say it, but in every other way, that's how I took it. So does it matter how it's said, or does it matter how it's received?
Let me see if I can break it down into a couple of pieces, McGraw. The first piece is that what Nixon ordered to be done was the entire Watergate investigation shut down, albeit only 4 days old at the time, but right, the entire investigation. What President Trump is alleged to have done is to have, at its worst, to have directed the FBI director to let it go, it being the investigation of Michael Flynn. There's been no allegation, and I think Director Comey confirmed that under oath yesterday, that President Trump ordered or suggested that the entire investigation be shut down. So there, in my judgment, in my personal opinion, right, there's a very big distinction.
So there's a fine line between stop the whole thing and stop investigating Michael Flynn.
Well, there's a fine line, but in the context of the opponents of President Trump trying to draw this analogy to the point of an identical similarity between Watergate and what's going on now. But there's another important point, and Comey even confirmed it yesterday, and that is that under our Constitution, McGraw, we have one executive, and that is the president. And everybody in the executive branch works for the president. Director Comey yesterday confirmed an axiom under our Constitution. If the President of the United States says to the director of the FBI, stop this investigation, that is a constitutionally valid order. Now, there may be political, legal, constitutional consequences that flow from that. But this notion that by the president directing that an investigation be stopped, constitutionally he has that power, and Comey confirmed that yesterday under oath.
Okay. So the president has the power to tell the FBI director to stop investigating something.
Absolutely.
Does he have the power to say, stop investigating my campaign?
Yes.
Okay. He has the power to fire him if he wants to.
Yes.
He has the power to say, don't investigate. Why was Nixon then over the line? Because it sounds like Nixon said, stop investigating the leak-in. Or the,
he did.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he
so,
did.
So if Trump is safe of the line, how did Nixon go over the line?
Again, the buckets fall into consequences. So the facts of Nixon were, as we found in the smoking gun tape,
Right.
He ordered the Watergate investigation to be shut down. The power of the president to do that under the Constitution, he has the power to do that.
Okay.
That doesn't mean, McGraw, that there can't be consequences. The one consequence was impeachment. And you'll recall the House Judiciary Committee had already signed out articles of impeachment.
Right.
What Nixon saw the handwriting on the wall in early August, that when Senator Goldwater and Senator Scott came to the White House and said, Mr. President,
Right.
you're not going to survive a trial in the Senate because of the smoking gun tape. You constitutionally may have had the authority to tell Haldeman to do what you told him.
Right.
But constitutionally, the Congress has the power to impeach and convict and remove you from office, and that's what's going to happen. Therefore, Nixon resigned.
So Donald Trump has a right to do all this. The question, again, it remains is, in whatever axioms we're using today, was it obstruction of justice?
Well, was it obstruction of justice? That's the criminal consequence. And then the constitutional consequence is what President Trump did a high crime and misdemeanor under the Constitution that would be sufficient to impeach him and remove him from office? The opponents yesterday were on the with the talking heads.
Right.
His opponents saying absolutely it's a high crime and misdemeanor. Bill Clinton was impeached
Right.
for obstruction of justice,
Right.
as was Nixon, and the supporters of President Trump are saying nowhere, it's not even close.
Right.
But what I would urge you, McGraw, and our listeners to be careful with is not to confuse criminal consequences from constitutional consequences.
Right, because you don't necessarily have to break the law to be impeached.
Correct.
Right. And
Correct.
you don't, and you can still break the law and not be impeached.
Correct.
Right.
Yes, and I think the perfect example is one of the articles of impeachment against Nixon was abuse of power.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not. You and I could spend all day in the federal criminal code. We're not going to find a criminal law on
Right.
abuse of power.
Right.
We could find obstruction of justice, but the Congress may conclude that even though it was a criminal violation, it did not rise to the level of high crime and misdemeanor. So what I would urge you and our listeners, McGraw, is to listen carefully when particularly the opponents of President Trump, when they're trying to equate well, we think this is obstruction of justice, therefore he should be impeached.
Right.
Those are two very, very different things.
All right, lots more to get to, and I risk this is why you go to law school, so you can you can pay for this man to explain these things all to you. Greg Willard with us. So if Donald Trump, if they're saying Donald Trump didn't cross the line, then I don't think Richard Nixon crossed the line. And I guess there are still people today, including my dead grandfather, who swore that Nixon shouldn't have been or should have resigned.
There are still people who don't believe that he crossed the line. I think the larger group, McGraw, would say that what he did in terms of the smoking gun tape crossed the line for a high crime and misdemeanor. As to whether it was criminal,
right.
You may recall in the spring of 1977, Nixon gave his interviews to David Frost in
right.
the movie Frost Nixon.
Sure.
And he famously replied to a question from Frost in the context of obstruction of justice. And Nixon said, when the president does it, that means it is not illegal.
Right.
And millions of people, myself included at the time, laughed and said, what a foolish statement.
Right.
With the benefit of 40 years, I look back, and I'm not laughing quite as hard at the President Nixon statement. It gets into some very esoteric constitutional issues, but if the president is the executive in charge of all prosecutions constitutionally, how can he obstruct himself,
right.
McGraw? And that was Nixon's point.
And so the argument is that the president is above the law.
Well, in the context of the criminal law on just obstruction of justice, not bribery, for example, but
right.
on the question of obstruction of justice, I think a rational argument could be made that prosecution of the president for obstruction of justice is an oxymoron, as distinguished, again, McGraw,
right.
from whether he should be impeached for that conduct.
Greg Willard with us. More to get to. Greg, hold that thought. 923, big fight.
Of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
My head hurts talking about this because it's so convoluted. Greg Willard with us, professor at St. Louis University Law School, also KTRS legal analyst. I'm not going to ask you a question because explain, you're talking here. I want to get out of your way. Explain what you want us to know about this.
I think it would help for you and me and our viewers, McGraw, to maybe just take a step back and as my grandchildren who watch the Daniel Tiger show, let's take a deep breath and let it go as to what's happening. What's happening is, I think by all accounts, we were attacked
right.
last year by the Russians, and they attempted to interfere with our elections. So what we have is, first of all, an effort to get the facts. You and I are old enough to remember Sergeant Friday on Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am.
Right.
So former FBI Director Robert Mueller has been appointed as special counsel. He's going to get the facts. And there are congressional hearings. We heard one yesterday, and they are going to get the facts. Once we get the facts, McGraw, those then will break out into 4 categories of consequences. Category 1, political. Category 2, counterintelligence. How do we stop these people from continuing it and doing it again? Number 3, criminal. We talked before the break about obstruction of justice. And number 4, in the eyes of the chorus of critics of President Trump, constitutional, which is impeachment. Mm-hmm. So again, let's get the facts, then we can let our system sort out the consequences: political, counterintelligence, right. criminal, and constitutional.
I get all that, and I still am sort of leaking oil on all of this because it is so convoluted. But assuming when you talk to lawyers and you say obstruction of justice, that's a legal term. But when you talk about impeachment, obstruction of justice isn't a legal term. I know it's a feel, right? It's in the eyes of the beholder, right? I mean, clearly.
Obstruction of justice is in that 3rd category of consequences, criminal. And so we have a federal criminal statute which makes it a crime to obstruct justice as defined in that statute. The high crime and misdemeanor, an impeachable offense, is in the Constitution. Then Congressman Gerald R. Ford, in the early 1970s, famously said, a high crime and misdemeanor is whatever a majority of the House of Representatives at any point in time decides it is.
Well, that's the truest thing ever been
To be
said.
sure.
Yeah.
And he caught a lot of flack and ha ha ha. But at its core, it's not something that 12 jurors are going to decide, McGraw or some artificial intelligence computer. There's not a statute that defines what a high crime and misdemeanor is. It's in the Constitution, and it's up to the House of Representatives to decide.
And the reason why Nixon resigned is because people of his own party went up and said it's over.
It's over.
The reason why Clinton didn't resign is because he maintained the Democrats and kept them from going to the White House saying, Mr. President, it's over.
It takes 2/3. So the process is the House of Representatives impeaches. That's a majority vote.
Right.
And then the Senate has the trial to decide whether to convict and remove from office. Clinton was impeached. Nixon was about to be impeached.
Right.
And so Nixon resigned when
Right.
Goldwater and Scott said, look.
Right, but if the Democrats went to Nixon or went to Clinton, right?
And said, look, you're not going to get 34 votes in the Senate, he
Right.
may well have resigned.
Right,
but
right.
he did not. And as I recall, McGraw, there were several articles of impeachment against him. And maybe one or two got a majority vote, but they did not rise to the 2/3.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk Comey for a second, because clearly Comey, this guy didn't like the tweet, and so manipulated all sorts of things, and said flat out yesterday, my goal was to get a special prosecutor appointed.
He had a little bit for everybody yesterday, McGraw. I think let's start with the bigger picture. I think this theory that President Trump's opponents had that he and his associates were in collusion with the Russians' attack, that took a hit yesterday, because and Director Comey confirmed that, as the president has been saying all along, there's no evidence of collusion of the Russian attack. On the other hand, the opponents of the president, who have been arguing that he's abusing his power, and some would say he obstructed justice, well, they probably got a boost. Similarly, Comey's public perception got a boost. I think his supporters would say, here is a textbook of a public servant doing his best, telling the truth and all. And the opponents, who have been screaming for months, said,
Right.
aha. And just like the president a few moments ago just tweeted out, he's a leaker like all the others. So
Right.
there were boosts and there were hits yesterday. And then I think it got lost, but we probably ought to mention it, McGraw. Attorney General Lynch
Yes.
did not have a good day yesterday.
If you could make an argument, she was trying to impede an investigation.
Well, or if I think more to the point, if the account is anywhere accurate, it certainly smacks of administering justice consistent with the political fortunes of one of the candidates,
Right.
and that was unfortunate.
James Comey, man, controversy finds that guy everywhere.
Well, it does, and again, I think what disturbed a lot of the president's supporters and Comey's opponents was, you'll recall, we talked on the air several weeks ago, McGraw, that Comey famously, when in the Bush administration, they
Right.
tried to extend an intelligence program, and he and then FBI Director Mueller stood down the White House Chief of Staff and White House counsel
Right.
because they didn't think it was right. And so then what you heard yesterday, including Senator Feinstein, well, then why didn't you stand up when this happened?
I'll end on this, and that is, I've always been taught and always had great respect for people who've said, you know what, that's inappropriate. What you're asking me to do is inappropriate. If you don't stop, I'm going to resign. Or you've asked me such an inappropriate question, I'm leaving, I'm resigning, here's my resignation. It didn't get to that level. clearly, because the guy didn't walk away.
It didn't, but I think, and I'm not taking sides this morning, as I try not to when you and I visit. But I will say this, from a human standpoint, having worked in the White House myself, when you're if you're having a private dinner with the president in the green room,
Right. So the power of the presidency.
That's quite a bit to ask of a member of the executive branch to basically stand up to the president at that moment.
Fair enough. Ladies and gentlemen, that is 1.5 credits towards your law degree at St. Louis University Law School. Greg Willard, professor and KTRS legal analyst. Thanks, as always.
Great to be with you,
I'm
my
sure
friend.
we'll talk to you soon again, because this ain't going anywhere.